Okay, so now we're going to talk about the promise of AI. But in order to talk about the promise of AI or artificial intelligence, I need to talk a little bit about American football. So in football, the quarterback, the person who gets the football from the center, let's put these here. So this is the quarterback that gets the ball from the center, right? And they give that ball to one of these people, which are the running back. And the running back runs it up the middle. This is one kind of running play. So the quarterback gets the ball, gives it to the running back, and then the running back tries to run it up the middle and then get closer to um, the end zone. And the running back is usually a combination of quick and powerful. So the much larger offensive linemen up here, they sort of block the defensive linemen to try to create a gap in this defensive line for the running back to run straight through the defensive line in order to get closer to the end zone. And this kind of play is what's called an up the middle run. Um, and so if that doesn't work, the other way you can another way you can do this is to have the running back just go around the defensive line in what's called an end run. So this is an end run. So why am I talking about this? Well, this is analogous to the promise of AI. So the up the middle run is kind of difficult, right? So I would consider running up the middle is kind of like psychology. Trying to understand how the mind works by running up the middle is a little bit like psychology, whereas the end run is a little easier potentially. And it's the promise of AI is that it might be easier to go up the sort of the end run, right? On the end of the defensive line. So in comparison to other scientific fields trying to understand the mind, you could reasonably argue that psychology has sort of hit a roadblock, or at least progress is somewhat slowed down. In other words, psychology has sort of failed to understand the mind in a really, really precise way. Um, and this could be for a variety of reasons. One reason is that we're less predictable than other things like inanimate objects. And so you have much less, and also you have much less flexibility with what you can do to humans, right? You can't just do anything to humans for ethical and moral reasons in the same way that and you can't, but you can manipulate inanimate objects, right? So the things that you can do to inanimate objects, you can do anything to an inanimate object, but you can't do anything to humans, right? And so the promise of AI is what's called an engineering end run around the problem. So you're basically trying to avoid the problem of trying to understand how the mind works, which is analogous the problem of trying to understand how the mind works is analogous to crashing through the wall here. And instead of trying to empirically answer questions about how the mind works, you can just simply go around the wall, right? And yeah, so rather than trying to understand how the mind works, you just build an artificial mind and try to get it to work and do things that the human mind could do. And the idea is that this would provide a different and hopefully fruitful perspective in studying the mind. And so although you may not completely understand how the machine or how an artificial mind works, which is possible, like, it's possible that you wouldn't understand how the artificial intelligence works, even though you built it. But because you built it, you should probably understand it better than you would understand the human mind. And there is some precedence for this in history. So, in the field of aerodynamics, for a long time, people tried to understand the laws of aerodynamics by studying birds when they fly. But a different approach was to just build a prototype model of something that flew and test it with something like a wind tunnel, which is this thing right here. And then you could try to work out all the kinks, and And by doing so, you could figure out the rules of aerodynamics in this fashion. And this is an example of sort of an engineering end run approach that has been used fruitfully in the past. Yeah. So one of the problems, though, with artificial intelligence um, is that it creates a whole new batch of problems. And the main one that it creates is, if you create artificial intelligence, how is it different from real or natural intelligence? Is it the same thing or are we missing something, right? So in using artificial intelligence, we're forced to ask questions about whether AI is similar enough to real intelligence for us to make reasonable generalizations about human intelligence. Um, yeah, so you could be asking, if we built an artificially intelligent machine, is artificial intelligence genuinely intelligent, or is it simply behaving or mimicking intelligence in a relatively constrained context? And you could think of things like ChatGPT. Is it is it genuinely intelligent, or is it just simply mimicking intelligence in the way that, mimicking natural intelligence? And one thing I want you to notice is that this problem is kind of unique to the study of the mind, right? So the purpose of the heart, the human heart, so going back to the heart, the purpose of the human heart is to pump blood so that it'll take deoxygenated blood from the body, send it to the lungs, bring the oxygenated blood back to the heart, and then send it out to the rest of the body. And simulating the mechanics of a heart is much more straightforward, in part because not only do we understand the mechanics of it, but it's actually a pretty simple mechanism, right? It's just a pump mechanism. And we don't really need to ask if an artificial heart is really pumping blood and achieving that in the same way that a real heart could do it. Whereas with artificial intelligence, we sort of do need to ask that question. Okay, so in the next video, we'll talk about the traditional view of computation.